Madam Mayor, we're going to take some of these things out of order on the agenda.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Okay.
We don't need a roll call, do we?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, it's not on here, so I assume not. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Black,
Present.
Vice Mayor Weinstein,
Here.
Commissioner Hodges,
Here.
Commissioner Oakley, Commissioner Douther.
Present.
Okay, Madam Mayor and Commissioners, I just wanted to mention one thing that Mrs. Weinstein made, Commissioner Weinstein asked me before the meeting, and just wanted to share it with all the commissioners so there's some understanding. The auditor has finished the audit and has finished the CAFR. The CAFR is actually at the printers right now, and there'll be hopefully a hard copy, electronic copy made on Wednesday, and then the hard copies of the audit hopefully will be here on Friday. The auditor is planning to be here on the 22nd at the City Commission workshop to present the CAFR and to answer any questions at that time. And also to answer Commissioner Weinstein's additional question, until the audit had been completed and the CAFR completed, and we were still making some journal entries, believe it or not, from last year, I did keep the previous year still open, which, it isn't a bad thing, but I'm going to be closing that in the next couple of days, or by the end of this week. And at that time, I will be in an opportunity to massage and look at the budget more for 2018. And it is my hope to come to the commission either in June or July with budget amendments to clean up the budget. Just a little house cleaning. The auditor and I kind of came to an agreement. It's always been my past practice, and everywhere I've been, to do budget transfers in the middle of the year and at the very end. And as you know, at the end of the year of last year, in October, I had to come to the commission and have some budget amendments done to clean up last year and some of the things maneuvers that we had to do. We cannot have any one department exceed their budget, so that's why we do the budget amendments. So it's not like I haven't forgotten them, and we will be doing them, but it will probably be done sometime in June or July. So I just wanted to make that clear. And I just wanted to give you an update also on the CAFR and the fact that I'm relieved that it's over. I wanted to give you a status of the FY 2019 department requests. We've received basically all of the department requests, and we have, management has sat down with pretty much all of the directors and departments, with the exception of Dave Marsicano's, all his departments, and we're planning to do that Wednesday. So it's our goal by the end of this week to have accomplished that task, and in preparation for review one-on-one with the commissioners. And we're planning to do that sometime next week.
May 21st or the 23rd.
The agenda for today is a little bit out of sequence, and if you could just please forgive us for that, but the things that we want to talk about, or the topics today, are basically the next slide, which would be the City of Madeira Beach, Florida debt and fund balance review. We want to give you just a brief summary of what the debt picture is and the fund balance. Then we want to, because the audit and the CAFR is pretty much completed, we want to give you what the 2017 budget to actual looks like in lieu of next week when the auditor comes and talks to you. And FY 2018, or this year, general fund status of how things look right now. And then 2019 fiscal impacts, and then some key 2019 budget dates.
Madam Mayor, if I may. Certainly one of the things that staff wanted to accomplish as part of this introductory presentation was to hit on basically the financial state of the agency, to look at where we've been, where we see ourselves, and where we find ourselves going. And that is the direction that we've been providing to department heads as they've met with city administration, the finance team, as well as HR, to look at, based on our historical trends, what are some wants versus needs, and then where do we find ourselves fiscally as an agency. Also looking at how we manage our debt service, as well as our general fund, which is the fund that is the largest fund within the city, but also helps fund general government operations. So when we dive into this presentation, it really is to establish that foundation whereby we can then start getting into more substantive discussions on operational aspects and how are we going to pay for certain things or reductions in service, et cetera. So certainly utilize this opportunity to ask the finance director or myself any questions that you may have to provide additional clarification. Now that after we go through this presentation and you have basically the grade of the agency as it relates to the fiscal strength, then you will see, okay, why do these requests align with this? And you can see, okay, these are some things that we know we have some available monies to invest in capital and those types. So it's really to set the foundation, and in subsequent budget sessions, get into more of the operational requests, the personnel requests, and the capital requests. So this is really starting off going on the debt and then getting more specifically into some other aspects when we look at our revenues and expenditures and how we've ran as an organization as far as year-to-date numbers.
So the first, if we can go into the debt, starting on page 6, and if you can recall, we kind of went through this last year in one of the workshops where we looked at the debt. We had our financial advisor, Nick Roca, come and speak to the City Commission on that. And at that time, the focus was on the Series 2013 bond, and the majority of the commission had some concerns on that. And again, that's page 6. The purpose of that series was to replace the existing city hall and a new fire station complex and replace the existing recreation center. The original principal amount was $4.7 million. The amount outstanding at this point is $4.3, and the final maturity date is 2043, and the call date is October 1st, 2023. And again, one of the things that our financial advisor made clear last year when he addressed the commission, that we've still got a little bit of ways before we can do anything with this debt besides the regular payments that we can make. Touching this thing before the call date, and our financial advisor was pretty clear last year, would generate a pretty hefty penalty of about $150,000 or around that amount. So, we want to give you another picture of this, and the payments that are planned to be made on this series next year total $297,613. So this principal outstanding will continue to decrease. On page 7, we go into the next revenue bond series, which is series 2014.
Director Pierce, if I may, to really just hit on the 2013 series. When it was discussed as part of the additional revenue that the city would collect if they effectively increase the parking, it was anticipated that the monies would be set aside for the purposes of paying debt service payments. So with this particular bond issuance, in the event that the board earmarks the money towards debt service, there's two things that can be considered. One, setting money aside for when the call date happens in 2023 for this. But as you see in the other series and the other debt issuances, there's no call date. We're able to pay down those debts sooner rather than later. So it would be staff's recommendation that instead of effectively pooling all those monies for the purposes of saving up for that 2023 date, pay down as much as we can on the other debts, and also, of course, put some aside for the call date on this, but we can definitely make substantial dents in what our debt service payment is on the debt note, on the notes we have, that there's no prepayment penalty, and we can go ahead and effectively reduce the city's financial contribution. So that's just something for you to think of when we're having that broader discussion at the first meeting in June as to what staff is anticipating doing with that additional revenue for the debt service. Because if we have it in essence sit in an account in escrow for that 2023 date, we're still incurring interest and debt service, making debt service payments on our other loans, where we can effectively pay off some of those and maybe even eliminate them in totality. Depends on how our revenue projections come in. So.
That's a good point.
I've got a couple of questions. On page 6. Refundable debt of $3,700,000. What is that?
The original principal amount, the amount that was originally borrowed, is the 4.7.
Okay. And the non-callable debt, is that 640? Is that the fire truck? What is that 640?
Non-callable, the total of those two add up to the 4.3. One is, part of it is a refundable debt, and part of it is non-callable debt. And again,
I understand that, but I mean, what are they, I guess is what I'm asking.
our investment advisor will be here next Tuesday.
Okay.
And he can go over that in more detail with you. And I forgot to mention that, that's a key thing. Our investment advisor will be here next Tuesday to address the commission on any questions that they have, particularly on the presentation today on the debt service and fund balance. The Revenue Bond 2000 Series 2014, the purpose of this bond was to finance the undergrounding of the city's utilities on Gulf Boulevard, basically Phase 1 and Phase 2. And the original principal amount was a little over $3 million. The principal outstanding is at 1.2 or 261,000, and the final maturity date is November 1st, 2018. And the interest rate is 1.3%. We would like to come back to this. So we would like to go ahead and talk about the two other debts, but come back to this because this thing is a little bit of a situation that we want to talk about and to mention a couple of things to you.
Madam Mayor, if I may, Commissioner Douther, with respect to the non-callable debt, basically the city can pay down all the way to that $640,000. But that $640,000, if we were to pay that debt off, that amount is that it's a security basically that the lending institution says you can pay it all the way down to that amount, but that's the amount that you have to keep on the books in essence to be able to secure the loan. So you can pay down here the $3.7 million, but the non-callable debt, the $640,000, is money that they say you owe us that, and you're going to keep that for the duration of the loan, because that's how they, of course, incur interest and other things like that. So you can pay all that down, but you have to, that 640, there's really no room for negotiations with respect to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if we could skip to the the Revenue Bond Series 2015. And the purpose of this bond was to finance improvements to the stormwater system, and basically to fund the BOC project, which is just about completed, and the ongoing progress of Rex Place stormwater. The original amount was $6.2 million. The principal outstanding is 5.5. The final maturity date is October 1st, 2030. And the interest rate on this is 2.59%. And the call date basically can be any time, and to make that clear, the refundable debt of the total amount, again, this can be paid off at any time without any payment or penalty. The Series 2016 was the purchase of the fire rescue apparatus, and the security on this was basically the penny for the Pinellas, for the local option sales tax. The original amount was $725,000. The principal outstanding is $389,000, and you can see how much that has decreased. And the final maturity is December 1st, 2019, and the interest rate on that is 1.59%. One thing that you can see, and again, the call date on this is any time. The refundable debt is the full amount, the $389,000. And again, the call date is any time without any real penalty. And again, you can see with the interest rate at 1.59%, like all the other notes, it is good debt. So really, going back to, really one of the purposes of the workshop today is to go over a situation or a dilemma. And on page 11, going back to the Revenue Bond Series 2014, the final maturity date that we went over just recently is got a maturity date of November 1st, 2018. This bond was secured by the interlocal agreement payments related to Gulf Boulevard Beautification Project, Penny for Pinellas, set to expire in 2019. The amount of this final maturity figure was 1.7, but the city, and this was made by my predecessor before I got here this time last year, there was a prepayment done on this, probably around February timeframe last year of $443,000, and that reduced, along with the payment that we made during 2017. We made a payment in November of over $644,000, dropped the payment to $1,261,000. So that $1,261,000 is due on November 1st, 2018. So it would have to be noted in our budget for 2019 as a payment and as an obligation from the general fund to the debt service to make that payment. So looking at that, we contemplated two refinancing structures, or just to back up a second, we talked to our financial advisor about this $1.2 million payment coming up and what would be our options, and to provide options to the commission, to management and management to present to commission. And on two refinancing structures that the city could consider is a 2-year extension and a 3-year extension. So on page 12, the option of a 2-year extension is listed with a maturity date of 2020 and an interest rate of 3.18%. And the cost issuance would be $25,000. The over 2-year payment, the payment would be over the 2 years, $448,012, and the principal amount would increase, of course, due to the cost to $1,286,000. So the total debt would be $1,343,189. And basically, the interest cost to do this 2 years would be about $60,000.
For 2 years.
Right. The next page, 13, so you see the other option that our financial advisor had looked in for us. And by the way, some of these slides are from the financial advisor, and I just think that he did a really good job in helping us with not only these options, but in a lot of other questions that we do have. The 3-year extension is an interest rate of higher. So instead of 3.18%, it's up to 3.25%. The total debt on this is $1,366,028, and the regular payment each year would be $341,765. One of the advantages of this option is that the payment over the 2 years would be for each year $448,012. If over the 3 years, the payment would be $341,765. So there would be a saving, or there would be less amount, there would be a decrease with the 3-year option of basically a little over $106,000. But it is at a higher interest rate, and that is one thing to consider as well. The interest for the total 3 years would be about $80,000. So the difference in interest would be from the 2-year to 3-year would be, per our financial advisor, about $20,000 more in interest from the 2-year plan to the 3-year plan.
Madam Mayor, if I may, just a couple of things with respect to the 2 or 3 year extension. As it sits right now, as a agency, in the event that we decided to say we wanted to pay off the $1.2 million with available unassigned fund balance, you can effectively do that. But by doing that, it is such a spike in the fund balance numbers for the organization that it would, in essence, impact our ability in future years to effectively go out and borrow money on the free market. Also, it will be something that would be notated in our annual financial report in subsequent years to do that. So one of the things, because I did ask the question on some of the bond issuance, can we, if we have cash on hand, can we effectively go out there and pay that off? And the financial advisor mentioned that we would in essence lose basis points, as well as it would be a concern to lending institutions as well as rating companies as well. So we're looking at it from multiple avenues. The other thing is that if we look at a 2 or 3 year extension, if you go with the 2 year extension, in essence, the $448,000 that you are already paying, your debt service payment remains the same. So it's just basically a gradual payment. If you decide to go with the 3 year extension, you also are able to experience a little bit more financial liquidity. So you're able to get, I think, an additional, $106,000?
$106,247.
So it'll be $106,000 per year when you look at the different options, and that's highlighted on the other slide that the finance director will get into. But one of the things to note is that in the event that the board says they're amenable to a 3 year extension, those monies that are utilized to pay for the Series 2014 bond is the penny for Pinellas monies. So if you do find yourself in a situation whereby you get an additional $100,000 a year, it's not something that you can say, we're going to put it in the general operations for the government. You would then, as a board, will have to say, let's invest it in a capital project similar to that you do for any other penny for Pinellas project. So I did want to mention that if it's the board's pleasure to say, we're okay with going out to 3 years, and then saying those monies, that $100,000 that we would see as a result of that change, can go into some physical infrastructure projects that the board will decide as part of the budget process. So I just wanted to make sure that we noted that for the record.
You know, one thing I'd like to do is jump to page 16 And because you're probably thinking to yourself, well, why are we facing this right now? And why are we facing this $1.2 million payment that's gonna come up in November? Because, you know, I would ask that too if I was you. I mean, why was that picked at that period of time? And so page 16, I thought I would, and I kind of went over this at a previous commission meeting, but I thought it would be good to break it down again so you could see it visually. There is a link to this debt payment to the Pinellas, the penny for Pinellas reimbursement that we get from the county. Specifically related to the undergrounding project. So on page 16, what I basically wanted to do is the penny for Pinellas for FY 2017 budget was $659,000. Now, during the 2017 year, we paid out $558,000 on phase one. So that's the figure that I sent to the county to get reimbursed. Well, we didn't use up the whole allocation and the carry, so we had $100,980 left. And if you don't use it, it carries over. So that $100,000 then carried over into this year's allocation, making our allocation now with the 2018 budget, the 658, basically the 660,000 plus the 100. What's available now to get reimbursed is 760,000. So, and I really have not reimbursed anything yet. Phase two is going to be starting in another couple of weeks. So the picture is when phase one, I think the reason for the 1.2 is that phase one would have been completed a lot sooner than what it was, and then it would automatically jump into phase two. That didn't happen. Phase one of the project was completed, and there was a little bit of a lag. In fact, we're still in that lag period where I still have not received, or I haven't made any payments yet, and we're still looking at submitting reimbursements and the opportunity to receive reimbursements of that 760,000. So in the next couple of weeks, when phase two and Steve Tart with CPWG gets rolling, you know, he'll start to incur costs, and we will start paying him. As we go into so in the middle of that page, the cost of phase two is a little over $1 million. That's what Steve approached the commission with, and the commission approved that. Less the reimbursement amount above, we still have the cost. So when Steve Tart completes the project, $289,000 of costs will still be available. And as we roll into October of 2019, we then get another fresh allocation from the penny, hopefully, of the $659,000. Less that cost would give us a balance of $370,000 available. But the point I'm trying to make in this analysis is to show you that there's been a lag there between when phase one was completed and now when phase two is starting. And I think that the mindset is that we would have paid some of this, got reimbursed in time to make this $1.2 million payment without too much hurt. And so because of the lag in reimbursements, you know, that's why we see ourselves where we're at right now. So I wanted to present this on page 16 because it's a little bit of a timing issue of when this project gets done and when we get reimbursed. And one point to be made clear too, because when I went over this at a previous commission meeting, a couple of commission meetings ago, when CPWG does the undergrounding and they complete through 144th, they will not be completely done. So we will have 370,000 left available if that project can be totally completed. So the $1 million was basically to get us from the 150th Avenue on Phase 2 through to the 144th. And it's my understanding that to complete the whole thing, it would definitely be within that 370,000 or less than that amount. So I just wanted to explain that. So going back to page 14, under both options or both options of refinancing, the city has the option to prepay. One of the advantages is the city has the option to prepay the financing of the loan for a minimal fee. So with the 2-year plan and the 3-year plan, the city could prepay the loan at any time and incur the estimated cost of $2,600. And as the city manager mentioned before, the difference in the annual debt service expense between the 2 years is that the 3rd-year plan, the city would have a payment of $106,000 less per year over those 3 years. So a little bit higher of an interest rate, but you've got more money to play with. That $106,000 could go toward paying some type of other obligation within the budget, or we could allocate that in another area of the budget.
Madam Mayor, if I may, the recommendation would be, in the event that the board wants to consider the 3-year option, would be to utilize that money to fund capital. Because it's one-time monies, it's a one-time expense. We don't become reliant on it in any form or fashion. So it doesn't contemplate that the organization would effectively increase operational costs or those types of things. So if the board was so inclined to say, if we decide to go out for this 3-year debt issuance, we're going to go and invest this in some of the infrastructure items that you will see that will come up as part of the budget, and that will be the recommendation as staff, so we don't find ourselves in a situation that it becomes part of your daily operational expenses, and then once that $106,000 is gone, now you have to find a way to recoup that revenue or make the corresponding reduction. So if we were going to do anything with respect to purchasing any emergency vehicle apparatuses that we needed, or make capital investments on new infrastructure, improving some of the infrastructures, it would be staff's recommendation that the board consider making one-time expenditures and not becoming reliant as an existing revenue stream, because we all know that in 2021 it goes away.
Well, but we could put it in the general fund, right?
You can, it would be restricted because, Director Pierce, correct me if I'm wrong, the money that is in essence pledged towards this is the penny for Pinellas money.
Yes.
So it's very restricted on
Of
what
how
you
it can be
can,
used.
what you can use
Okay.
it for, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
By the way, we did present these 2 options to the Budget Committee at the May 9th meeting, and they did make a recommendation to go to the 3-year plan.
How does this, if we paid that, do we have the money to pay off the 1.261 in November of this year?
Well,
Without, how is that going to affect the budget?
Well, here's
The reason
how-
let me kind of back up for 1 second. The reason I asked that question is because I know when I ran, the people that I talked to was pay off the debt. Not extend it out, not any of this other things, but to pay off the debt, period. That was their biggest thing. They wanted the debt paid off.
Well, again, that's why I wanted to mention the penny for Pinellas, that 1 page, and show you that I think we're looking at a timing issue here. When this debt was initially put together by the previous finance director, it was 3 years ago, when this was started to be planned out. And so, you know, it does cause a little bit of a burden, and that's why I wanted to mention the timing. Now, as far as the total budget is concerned, it would take more allocation in the general fund to support the transfer to the debt service. And to give you an example, if we left the 1 million, if we did plan to pay the 1.2 million, we would be looking at allocating 2.1 million in total debt payments for all four of these series in next year's budget, compared to if we kept it and did the 3-year plan, would be looking at half that, or basically 1.2 million.
But, Walt, you said, when we did the budget last year, you kind of said that we would not have any problem paying these off next year. So now, and I understand things come up and different things have come up in this last year. But that was your words to us when we sat up here last year and we were working on the budget. And I know we were under a crunch and everything else. But now, it's like, oh, we can pay it off, but we're better off extending it out. You know, the people that I talked to and voted for me asked, no, they don't want that. They want it paid off.
Well, you know, as Mr. Evans has found, and only the couple, 4 or 5 weeks that he's been here, I learned over a period of time last year that, we do have capital needs, and I don't think that we really took a lot of them in consideration when we created this year's or the FY 2018 budget. And so we do have some needs out there that I don't think we really allocated and made available. And that's why right now I think we're having some growing pains as far as capital needs. And if I had to learn that over time, I'm sorry, it might have taken me a while to figure that out.
I don't know if we need to go, when we go to this year 2019's budget, if we need to look and say, okay, right now we're allocating X amount of dollars for this department or that department. Maybe we need to figure out a way to cut it by 10% or each department by 10% in order to pay this so it doesn't affect us that way. I don't have a good answer, and to me, this is not a good answer. To me, the people who elected me said they want this paid off.
It can be done, it can be done, but it's a heavy chunk to do. And I'm not saying that toward the end, it's gonna be a little bit of a balancing challenge to do that.
If I may, Madam Mayor, with respect to the 2014 issuance, if we were to take $1.2 million to pay that debt down, you effectively would be utilizing the available funds from the City of Madeira Beach's taxpayers to pay for a debt issuance that the penny for Pinellas sales tax would effectively end up paying for. So you would front end the money with City of Madeira Beach residents exclusively, and then in due time, you would get that money back from the county. So there will be an opportunity for, some bridging, but our concern is that the monies that we get is from penny for Pinellas. The cost of the extending the loan would be paid for penny for Pinellas. In essence, the City of Madeira residents would not be out $1 because of the way in which the penny for Pinellas system works and what the capital outlay is. So we thought that in the event that the board wanted to look at paying down some of the debts, looking at the other debt service payments that you have that are not being, in essence, supplanted by the penny for Pinellas. Because I did even ask the simple questions about the fire truck. If you look at, when we get into the conversation about the fire truck, I think we have a little over $300,000 remaining. And I asked that specific question to the gentleman that's the financial advisor. And they certainly, again, discourage the city from just stroking the check and paying that loan off because of, you're gonna lose basis points. You're going to get a notation in your audit, as well as it's going to place some concern in the rating agencies as well, because they look at it differently than you and I in our own personal finances. And so our concern is that if we make a knee-jerk reaction such that there would be some unintended consequences, and should we find ourselves having to go out again for any type of issuance, the capital markets are going to be concerned, the rating agencies are going to be concerned. And so we looked at what's a gradual way to effectively do that, because you don't want to diminish your fund balance. And I think one of the things the board has done that is responsible is that alternative revenue stream with the monies that you're looking to appropriate with the additional parking revenue. That is something that you clearly can utilize as a mechanism to pay it down. But once you take a chunk of money out of your, in essence, savings account, that lends some concerns to the financial markets and financial professionals.
And that's a good point. In fact, just recently, Moody's, they questioned me for about an hour and a half. Are in the process of re-rating our city. And right now, we're rated AAA, which is one of the best. And, you know, they're in that process of rating again, and they do that process typically annually. And what they like to see in your fund balance is they like to see consistency. So even though you might have taken money out of there to pay down the debt, and you might think that might be a good thing, they like to see consistency over the fund balance and continuous growth.
You know, I understand that, and I understand what you're saying too, Mr. Evans. But, you know, it's one thing to pay the debt off early, but it's one different thing to pay the debt off when it's due and not extend it out further. You know, and that's kind of what I'm saying. The debt is due in November, period. You know, now we're going to say, okay, but let's extend it out for 2 or 3 more years. You know, to take it and pay it off when it's due, you know, I don't see a negative side to that. Rather than extending it out for 2 to 3 more years and paying that additional interest, you know, and all those type of things. I just don't see it.
The only thing is, and I concur with city manager, and that's, again, I hate to keep going back to the penny for the Pinellas, but again, it's a timing issue of when we would get reimbursed. And typically, can we balance this? Yes, but you do not have enough in departments to cover balancing this type of payment. You know, something would have to give.
It would be staff's recommendation to, in the event that the board wanted to effectively pay off the $1.2 million in November, to pull that solely from your unassigned fund balance, because in the event that you go into departmental operations, it's not what, if we cut departments 10%, it would be what departments go away, because your departments are so small that effectively you would have to eliminate an operation to be able to take care of that. And then that's one-time monies. If you get rid of an operation, effectively you're going to have to contract out for another entity to come and provide that operation. So if the board's pleasure is to say, we want to look at paying that completely off in November, that would come from your unassigned fund balance. And when we have the meeting with the board on the 22nd of May, that's an excellent question to pose to both your financial advisor and your auditor, and they can tell you the concerns they would have with an action such as that. In the perfect world, had Director Pierce or myself been with the organization, I would have certainly said that having that big balloon payment without knowing what the unknowns is was a risky, proposition. Certainly something that is more, suitable to the 400,000 or the 300,000 is something that an agency our size can swallow. But if you're looking at, $1.2 million, that's in essence your fire operations. The cost to fund your fire services is about that. So it's a sizable chunk for the organization to be able to come up with. So that's something that the board certainly can have an additional conversation, but I would pose that same question to your financial advisor and your auditor to tell you exactly what that decision would do to your ratings, or what it would be noted in the audit, et cetera. But we would certainly prefer that the board either consider an extension of 2 or 3 years. That also allows for you to make sure you get that money for penny for Pinellas, and that's money that comes in from all visitors to Pinellas County, and you, in essence, your taxpayers would not have to front the money for X a period of time until you're reimbursed back from the county.
You know, another way to look at this is that if you didn't want to make this, then in hindsight, the phase 2 for the undergrounding probably should not have been done or stopped. Because at least then, we would at least have the money and not incur that cost. So, but I wouldn't prefer to do that because, you know, we are taking advantage of a reimbursement that's reimbursing us all for that cost. So it made sense to do it. And in hindsight, I'm glad that it was done. I just want to make clear that I just think that there was a timing issue, again, a timing issue of when the last project of phase 1 was completed and now when phase 2 is being started. And quite frankly, when I reimburse the county or even FEMA, you know, you're not talking weeks here. Sometimes it's a month and a half to get the money back. And that's some of the challenges that we face in the finance department.
If you extend it out 2 years, 3 years, whatever, and we go to pay it off then, are we gonna run into the same problem? Well, if you pay it off, your rating's gonna go down. You're gonna lose points. Where does it stop? That's what I don't understand, you know. At some point, it's got to stop. But, you know, I understand you're saying, okay, if we pay it off, our rating might go from a AAA down to an A or a AA or whatever the case may be. You know, our points are gonna go down. But what happens when it comes due again? And we go to say, we want to pay it off. Well, if we pay it off, our rating's going to go down. So I don't know where it stops.
I think the 3 years, particularly with it being 106,000 less, is manageable.
That's not what I'm asking.
Right.
That's not what the city manager said, or you. You said, if we pay the debt off, it could lower our rating from a AAA down. We lose points,
Yes.
you know. So what happens the next time the debt is due? And we go to pay it off, and they say, well, if you pay it off, you're going to go from a AAA to a AA, or you're going to lose points. You know, where does it stop?
Well, and that's one of the things that when we get into more in-depth budget discussions is we cannot, as a city, continue to defer maintenance. We have to make sure that our capital budget is funded appropriately, because when it's not funded appropriately, you find yourselves in a situation where something that could have been a cosmetic repair is now a complete reconstruction. So our concern is with some of the projects and initiatives that we have deferred as an agency, those bills are now coming due, and we don't have the capital budget to effectively fund that. We would love to be able to adopt a pay-as-you-go philosophy as an organization, but right now we do have the debt that we have on the books. So how do we manage that, provide for an opportunity for, once we pay all these things off, then easily as an organization, my recommendation would be, if you've got $450,000 a year that you're pledging towards debt service, take that $450,000 a year and put it aside for a couple years, and before you know it, you have $1.5 million, and you can go out there and effectively do some of your capital projects and pay for them cash, as opposed to getting into a situation. But we've been, as an organization, very reliant on our revenue that we collect from parking, and we haven't been able to appropriately fund our capital budget like it should be. And so when you have a situation where you have a city hall that you need to reconstruct or other capital investments that you need to make, not having that cash in hand and not being able to put that money towards it is something that, you know, hindsight being 20/20, you can always look back at different decisions. But as an organization moving forward, once that debt is paid off, your capital improvements budget is a 5-year plan, and you need to work that plan. Furthermore, we need to make sure that we're not putting just plug numbers into the budget and switching up projects. We need to carry forth that plan, because had we done that, we would have probably not found ourselves in the situation now where we're looking for every nickel and dime to be able to put together a capital budget so we can invest in infrastructure. But I think it's pretty apparent that the board obviously wants to be, debt adverse. You don't want to find yourself in these types of situations. Unfortunately, we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, finding a way to, in essence, smooth out the existing debt we have, but also put money in some capital projects, so we're not coming back to you in 3 years and you say, well, Mr. City Manager, why do we have to spend $3 million versus $350,000? If I'm not taking proactive measures and taking preemptive steps, invariably we're going to find ourselves where it's at a state of disrepair and we've got to rebuild. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to massage in the entire process, so we're not in a situation whereby you have to utilize every available fund to be able to fund government. And the director and I have been talking about how do we become less reliant on our parking revenue and more reliant on our ad valorem revenue, because in the perfect world, that $2 million that you generate from parking annually, that's what I would utilize to fund my capital budget, my one-time purchases, because that's money, once you spend it, you don't have a reoccurring payment. What has happened is, unfortunately, we find ourselves in a situation where, as government, we've become so reliant on that parking revenue and the ad valorem revenue that in the event that we see some changes in the economy and we see parking revenues impacted, we have some serious concerns as how you're going to continue funding operations. So we want to put forth a plan that really starts correcting us and puts us in a better financial situation. But your points are very well taken, and we have to adopt a philosophy that says, you know what, if we're going to do this, we're going to plan for it, and we're going to have cash on hand to do it, and not put ourselves in a situation whereby you're borrowing X amount of millions of dollars over a couple of years. But again, some of the challenges that we had as an agency during that time, for a city hall project or what have you, there should have been prior pennies for Pinellas that should have been put aside for those projects and those initiatives. So, there's always different things that you can do. We're just trying to find what's the best way to provide a smoothing effect that doesn't jeopardize our ratings, our fiscal strength, and our ability to continue to provide service.
Yeah, I understand all that. And I understand we're playing catch up from many years of things not being done properly. A good example is the impact fees. We really have no impact fees, and they would be covering a lot of the cost of infrastructure, that the city just basically gave away to developers. And, I understand we're playing catch up with that, but we also need to make sure we get those things in place so we're not running into this 10 years from now or 5 years from now, Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
Mayor, may I say something, please? I certainly, listening to John, agree with and certainly have ran on the platform of fiscal responsibility, and I thought about it long and hard. And when I attended, because I attended the budget review committee on this item, and I went away and I was thinking, oh God, we're just looking at more, we're looking at extending it, or we're looking at paying another $80,000 over 3 years, and all I want to do is get us out of debt. But then I guess I've thought about it over the last week or so, and I think that fiscal responsibility certainly is just that, and I'm totally in gear with that, totally in line with it. But I think that, like John just said also, is that I think when I thought about it very clearly, we were mired for years, since 2013, I guess, or 14, and we're just playing catch up, and we really we had a sense of what we needed to do and where we needed to go with it. But I do believe, after I thought about it long enough, I do believe that we can, over the next, it won't be this year maybe, but it really will start this year, is to really put a real line, a real ruler down with when we go into our discussions of our operational and our funds, as far as, and I don't like to use the word cutting, but I just like to use the word appropriating properly, when we really get into that. And I guess after I thought about it long and hard, I thought, well, maybe the 3 years, I certainly thought of the 3 years better than the 2-year plan. And I don't know where it's gonna go either, but I have to think that that's why we have the good financial people that we have now. That's why we have our city manager and Mr. Pierce. And the people that came, that are financial advisors, I can't remember his name, but I think that it'll be really important to have him make it a little bit more palatable to us. And I think that will, I think I will feel okay with that. I'm not saying I will, but I think it certainly is important to give him the opportunity to tell us. Because it was hard for me to understand, and it was hard for some of those other people to understand, that how you can be in a good financial position and want to pay it off and be penalized for it. I think that was difficult for me to accept. I couldn't figure that out, but it really happened.
And I think the chairman of the budget committee hit it on the head too, when he used the example that he doesn't have any debt.
Oh, yeah.
And his wife has a lot of credit cards, and she makes them on time, and the credit card agencies love her.
She's got great debt.
And
he
her
has none.
credit score is higher than his, even though he's paid off all his debt.
Yeah, that was
That
interesting.
is not necessarily a bad
He
thing.
doesn't understand, and I
Plus, it's
thought,
comfortable. It's not,
I thought he hit it
It's
home
not
appropriately.
yeah, it was a good example, one good parallel. Yeah.
But, it goes back to the thing too, is I think we just want to make clear too that we have good debt. We've gone over some of these finance rates, and they're very good. You can't get them, and I don't even know how they were achieved in the past. 1.45 and 1.5 for the fire truck. I mean, I just can't see how you can get that. But I just wanted to make clear too, that, the rate that we do have, and rates are very susceptible to change. On the 3-year, the 3.25%, we had to go back a couple of times to get that number, or to get it to get at that low rate. And we're locked in right now, just like buying a house, we're locked into that rate. So on page 15, there's a schedule of events, and our financial advisor will be here next Tuesday. He wanted to be here today, but he had a prior obligation. I'm sure if he was here today, he'd probably be making more key points than we are. But he'll be here next Tuesday to address any concerns that you have. But page 15 lays out how we would attack this from a timing aspect if we wanted to keep within that rate, because that rate on that 3-year is very subject to increase at any time. Once we go, we're locked in now for about, I think it's 45 days, but once we cross that rate will be gone.
Right.
Now, it could be less, but it also could be a lot more.
I don't have all the answers, I don't know it, and, I think that's one of the reasons that we elected to have different committees, such as the Budget Committee, the Charter Committee, and for them to bring their expertise. So what I would also like to do is have it the 22nd, a representative from the Budget Committee to come and speak to us and listen to what they have to say from their collective wisdom. I think would, be beneficial, at least to me, I know it would. You know, I mean, that's why we asked to have a budget committee, so they could come back with their knowledge and say to us, here's what we recommend, you know, and that, you know, I understand that the city saying, hey, here's what we recommend, you know, but I'd also like to hear it from the budget committee, and be able to ask them some questions on why they did what they did.
Absolutely, we can certainly get that coordinated.
To go further on the presentation, we would like to go into the fund balance discussion, and starting on page 18. Page 18 basically goes over how the policy, fund balance policy highlights and the adoption of the fund balance policy on September 8th, 2015. And the fund balance policy addresses, sets an appropriate level of fund balance in order to account for risks that might occur, extreme weather, economic growth or weakening, the city commitments, so forth. And the GFOA, or the Government Finance Office Association, was best practices was also used as in setting those parameters in the policy. And page 19 goes into the different fund balance classifications, the non-spendable fund balance, which includes some inventory items, prepaid items, restricted fund balance for specific, which is basically for specific purposes, money allocated for grants is a good example. Unrestricted fund balance, where you have committed fund balance, and those are amounts constrained by formal action by the BOCC. And within this is the reserve for the emergency storm response and the BP settlement. And assigned fund balance, those amounts that are intended for a specific purpose in the city's current adopted budget, i.e. compensated absences and purchasing obligations. The purchasing obligations, we'll probably go over that later. What that is that's carryover encumbrances from the previous year. And in the general fund, we carried over from the previous year, from 2017 into 2018, a little over $250,000 of encumbrances that were active. So that's an example of that. Unassigned is basically not obligated to anything, and expenditures from this fund requires action from the commission. The page 20, and these are good numbers that the auditor will most likely be mentioning next Tuesday. The non-spendable, it breaks out the non-spendable, the restricted, the committed, and assigned and unassigned fund balance. Now, I will tell you, the unassigned fund balance at the end of 2017 did drop. It was at 5.4 at the end of 2016, and it dropped to 5.1. And the reason being there is last year, we did have some settlements. We had some obligations that were not budgeted. And I came to the commission in October and basically told you what those were. And we even had a hurricane that contributed to that crossed fiscal years. So that's one of the reasons for the drop. Fortunately, overall, our fund balance in 2016 was 10.2 million. It did increase to 10.6. That's a good thing. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons for the increase is in the non-spendable, the due from other funds. We categorize, the general fund helped the marina build a dock, and the funding of that from the general fund was about $625,000, and it really was never ever booked. And the auditors and I struggled over this, but the booking of that asset to the general fund did contribute to the health of the general fund. And last year, that money, of course, the dock probably wasn't completed, but that money in limbo really wasn't helping us any, and really was not booked into our into our financial system. I mentioned the subsequent years expenditures, the 200, I mentioned 250, it's 275,000. Those are carryover encumbrances from the previous year. I will note also the committed, the BP settlement, the 452,000. I'm in the process, by direction from the city manager, to try to find out what the restrictions are for those funds and how we can use those. Even the auditor has mentioned to me, well, you guys have this money, find out what you can use it for, and you can use that. If we use those funds, they're in committed. So again, the rating agencies would not see it as a negative if we took that money out that's committed for that settlement and use it. It's committed to be used, and that's why it is in that committed category.
Madam Mayor, if I may, when we did have conversations at the last board meeting about setting aside monies for the purposes of assisting with some capital infrastructure improvements at John's Pass, that is the specific funding source that staff was looking at, that BP settlement monies. And can that money be utilized for some infrastructure, cosmetic improvements, in essence, to help support the tourism industry, which in essence, that money was provided for to be able to mitigate against what some of the losses were associated with the oil spill that we experienced. So by the next meeting, hopefully by the 22nd, we'll be able to share with the board specifically what those monies can be used for. And then in our conversation at the June meeting, that you may feel comfortable so when your constituents and the businesses come up, you can say that, well, out of this BP settlement money, we're looking to allocate a portion of this money to address some of the concerns or some of the cosmetic things that the folks at John's Pass have expressed to us in a public meeting. So we're doing some research on that. We should be able to provide you a good definition on that by your workshop on the 22nd of May. But that is specifically a fund that we were targeting because it's committed, and it, like the finance director said, it won't provide any adverse impact if you do spend that money, because it is money intended to make some improvements. So there's a lot of things that we can do to hopefully fund our capital budget, as well as address some concerns that have been articulated at the pass.
How long ago did we get that money?
I'm sorry, what was that question?
When was
How
the
long
money
did-
received?
I believe it was on the books last year. I gotta believe it was around 2015 when that money was allocated.
And there are restrictions then as to how it can be used?
We're in the process of trying to find that out.
I'm just wondering why we haven't figured that out already.
My call is in, I've got some call-ins to other cities around the beaches here. I do know Indian Rocks got close to $1 million. So, my desire is to check in, see how the beaches and how they use those funds.
Okay.
On page 21, talks about the emergency stormwater response, and there is the idea being on that emergency storm response fund is not to be less than 33% or 4 months of general fund operating expenditures. And I guess that's 4 months was the determining factor in calculating what that is. By the way, I do have a correction on that. The general operating expenditures, the figure I got on there was incorrect. It was it's 6,778,700, and that's the number that the auditor uses to determine if we comply with what that stormwater fund balance should be, in addition to what the unassigned fund balance below should be, which is basically 2 months or 16.67% of general fund operating expenditures. And again, like the emergency stormwater response, the general fund operating expenditures is 6,778,700.
If I may, Madam Chair, one of the things that staff has been discussing is that the city, by virtue of creating that emergency storm response fund, has created two pots for fund balance. And one of the things that we were interested in seeing if the board had an appetite to consider is that at certain points, as an elected body and as a government, your constituents can come and say, wait a second, you've got 75.4% in your fund balance or your rainy day fund. Instead of taxing me, utilize some of the money that we've given you for X projects. So again, hindsight being 2020, this is a vehicle that could have been utilized to lend other funds money to pay back as far as a debt service. So the city or the general fund could have loaned sanitation, how they loaned the marina the money to be able to construct the docks, those types of things. Those were available at your disposal. Even the situation with the fire truck, you could have loaned yourself that money and then in essence pay that back and replenish it. But with that 33% that you put aside for emergency response or emergency management, every time the budget goes up or anytime property values goes up, since it's at 33%, it's a plug number that we have to put in that budget because there's a resolution that says you have to keep 33%. One of the things that we're going to ask the board to consider is to have a policy in place that says we're going to cap it at $2.2 million or whatever you think is appropriate, and allow for either 2.2 million or 33%, the lesser of the two. Because what's happening is we're utilizing today's funds to put away for tomorrow's events and not having that money work for us. So the intent behind the plan is to look at where we should be with our fund balance. GFOA says that they recommend that every city across the country have at least 2 months of operating expenses in their fund balance. We have that. We have that 16%. But then with the additional monies that we have, we're at 75.4%. So our hope is to look at the opportunities to say, can we draw down on our fund balance and find a happy median? I think as a beach community, you really want to stay around that 40 to 45, and I would say that 50% of fund balance is where you really want to be, because that's able to mitigate and against any damages or impacts that you may see as a result of a storm. Now, I call the insurance company and I ask them, with all the assets we have in Madeira Beach that the city insures, what is the most exposure that we can be exposed to, and what would be our deductible? And they said the highest you'd have to pay is $370,000. So I said, okay, $370,000. Let's just say another $500,000 for debris cleanup and removal, another couple of $100,000 for ancillary things and personnel costs or what have you. So conceivably, we were saying as staff that you have, I think a safe number would be about $1.6, $1.7 million. So then I asked the financial advisor, well, there's $2.2 million in there. Can I go to my board and ask my board the remaining balance, can I go pay off the fire truck because it's utilized for emergency purposes? And they said, Jonathan, as good as an idea that sounds, that's going to adversely impact you with the lending institution, with the rating agencies, and it's going to be noted in your CAFR. But I just wanted to show the board is that you do have monies that are available that you can say as a board, well, 2.2 million is excessive, and we want to gradually spend that down. And if you do it gradually, then you're not going to have the impact per se with the rating institutions and in your CAFR if you have a plan to spend it down. But what we would do if it's the board's desire is to really earmark or restrict that funding specifically for disaster mitigation efforts, to harden facilities, to look to acquire generators, to maybe even look to improve your sand groins, those types of things that you can say, the monies that we put aside for an emergency response is intended to shore up some of our facilities and our infrastructure in the future. So that's something that, staff just wants to, in essence, prime the pump with the board to let you know that we're looking at that. But certainly, we do not think it would be prudent to continue to build that well over $2.2 million, because right now it's equivalent to what you receive in ad valorem in 1 year. You have socked in aside for that emergency response fund. So that's something to consider, and certainly your residents are going to want to see you utilize the tax dollars that you've been collecting for the purposes of providing services, but to the point where you still protect the organization against any unforeseen circumstance.
And on page 22, it pretty much in the middle of the page gives an option that the city is considering updating the sizing goal of the Emergency Storm Response Fund to the lesser of 2.2 million or 33% of the general operating expenditures. So it's just an option to consider. Page 23 puts it a little bit in perspective. The city's total budget is approximately 18.1 million. 2.2 emergency stormwater fund would equate to a little over 12% of the budget. And if you combine the proposed 2.2 stormwater emergency storm response fund with the city's current unassigned fund balance of 5.1, it would result in over 40% of the city's annual budget.
Let me ask you a quick question on this. I'm kind of getting lost
Okay.
with all the numbers being thrown around.
Sorry.
How much do we have in it right now? 2.2?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, or 2,236,971. So that's sitting in that fund. So basically, if we said we want to cap it at 2.2 million, then next year we'd put $0 in there.
That would be correct. Because the time that we usually determine is when the auditor audits the books and he comes, and that figure I gave you, that 6,778,700 number, where he determined the total operating expenditures for the general fund, he determines that after the completion of his audit and the preparation of the CAFR. So at that point in time, he calculates, when he knows that number, what should be in, because it's the policy, what should be in both of those.
If we said no, we wanted to keep it at the present percentage that we have, the resolution that we have, how much would we be looking at putting into that fund next year? I guess, I know you don't know the numbers yet.
It would probably grow on average over $100,000 based on the level of our expenditures and the way they're increasing every year. So again, that's $100,000 that could be used.
So it'll go from 2.2 to 2.3.
It would be, in essence, 3 cents on every dollar.
Right.
Yeah, 3 cents of every dollar would end up going towards that. Plus, you have your other fund balance that's 16.7%, so you have that as well that you have to account for. Most communities that I've seen that have done the fund balance, you have situations where you have two separate ones, but in most cases it's one fund balance, and you say, okay, as a coastal community, as a barrier island, we don't want to be at 2 months, we want to be at 4 months to be able to, mitigate against any damages, but, considering.
And again, the rating agencies, if they see that fund is, within the fund balance is remaining pretty constant, even though they'd like to see everything increasing, but if it's constant, then that's going to make them happy as well.
So we're looking, you're kind of saying that to keep the emergency storm response at like 2.2 or some dollar amount versus a percentage. But what are you saying about the unassigned fund balance?
We're not saying anything on that. We want to leave that percentage calculation. We're not recommending changing that at all.
So we're saying keep that at 16?
Yes.
16.67%?
Yes, because that will continue to increase every year.
Yeah,
That's 5,108,000.
the unassigned.
Right.
Yeah, the unassigned
Right.
number, yes.
The unassigned fund balance, yeah.
Yeah.
5,108,000, okay.
Okay, so that would increase next year
As well, yes.
as well. Okay, okay, thank you.
And there's no restriction on you utilizing your unassigned fund balance or your emergency response fund balance. So what happens is, it really is at the discretion of staff to see which pot of money, in essence, that they dive into. So it's set aside, but realistically, the finance director with administration can say, we're gonna pull this from the unassigned fund balance, or we're gonna pull this from the emergency response fund balance. So it's really nebulous as far as the policy. It could be cleaned up, but we certainly don't want to have a situation where we consistently stockpile money when that money can be allocated to something else, because basically the auditor does a calculation and says, Walt, you're $50,000 short of that 33%, so you have to take available monies that you have and put it in there to meet that 33% as your policy stipulates.
You know, you sent out that email or that thing, wasn't an email. It said, you know, the average property on Madeira Beach pays $5,000 in property tax, and out of that, we get
$630.
$630. Are we looking at, or have we started to figure out, or can we figure out even, with all this new construction going on, and a guesstimate on how much, our houses increasing by 4% this past year, or 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it may be. Plus, you know, I go down Golf Boulevard, I see a huge building on the right-hand side over there by Mad Beach Fish House. They're getting ready to build a huge building there. Carnes is getting ready to start or do whatever. Can we figure, I know we won't probably get it in the taxes for November coming up, I understand that.
Right.
But can we look at that? Is there some way that we can look at that and kind of figure out where the city's gone?
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, I guess, you know, if property values go up by 5%, how much is that going to increase our revenue? You know, and I don't know. I'm just trying to put the big picture together in my head.
Absolutely, Commissioner, and we are actually going to be bringing this before the board on the May 22nd meeting. The Development Services Director, or the Planning and Zoning Director, and the building official are going to talk about all the development projects in the hopper and what the value of those permits are. And we can also, we'll know on June 1 what the projected increase in value in Madeira Beach will be from, that's when the property appraiser releases their preliminary numbers. So we can show, if we think we've got $200 million, just using a plug number, in development projects, what the anticipated ad valorem revenue would be. And that's something that we can simplistically calculate and provide that at the 22nd meeting to the board to say, if these projects were to come online tomorrow, this is what we can see as taxable revenue based on the permits. And based on the permits, obviously they're going to be a lot higher than that. You know, there's going to be a 5 to 7% deviation from the numbers that are cited on that permit.
I guess what I'm trying to look at is that, you know, I know these buildings are building right now. We're not going to get any tax revenue from them come November when taxes are due. But I think that as a commission, we need to be looking at not just next year, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. When we make these decisions, you know, we need to be looking down the road. We just can't look at next year and say, okay, because if we live year to year, we're going to screw ourselves. You know, we really need to be looking long-term and projecting, okay, if this comes in, then we do this and stuff like that. That's what I'm trying to figure out in my head when I look at all these numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have that ready for you on the 22nd,
Well,
sir.
and Mayor, we really do have to really take that into consideration, because the infrastructure that we might have to be looking at now, we might have to have based on new construction. I mean, you know, better facilities, better roads, better to move the people. But can I ask a question too? I want to go back. I want to go back to a little bit of hindsight, okay? Well, and just see that I'm on the right track. And it goes back many years. It goes back to 2010 and 11, where we had our unassigned fund balance of $7 million. Okay, and remember I kept these little sheets that you had given me?
Yes,
So, and I always thought how wonderful that was because, that's just such a healthy thing there. But then I remember Jonathan, and this is what I wanted to address, I guess, on last week, made the comment, address the importance of having a healthy fund balance, which we do at the 5,108,000, but not to overburden citizens. So would you explain that to me? I mean, I know that you kind of already have in our
Right.
discussions here, but I just want to get my brain right.
What we wanted to do, there's always that delicate balance that conceivably, if we wanted to go to the residents and say, we wanted to effectively increase the millage rate for the purposes of funding X, Y, and Z. The first thing that if I was a taxpayer in your community, I'm going to look at the financial health of the city, and I'm going to see that you have a very healthy fund balance. So before you effectively ask for a tax increase, I need to see you spend down that fund balance to a point that is consistent with your peers, because if you continue to incrementally increase taxes or what have you, then you find a situation whereby the property owners say, you're taxing me, and then you're not utilizing the fiscal resources I give you. So I would much rather have the money in my bank account than having it sit in your bank account and you not utilizing it. So there is that delicate balance on the scale where we want to be able to address the needs of the community, and we have the fiscal resources to do that, but also make sure that we're penny wise with respect to what we do and we don't overextend ourselves. So it really is, you want to have your fund balance for those rainy days and in case something happens. And we know that it is most likely inevitable that there will be some type of economic hiccup in the next, 12 to 24 months. It's just the nature of the economy. And so we need to protect against that, but we also need to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we spend all the capital we have on hand and then have to go to the residents to be able to fund government. So it really is that delicate balance in finding what's a healthy spot for us to be before we can conceivably, look for a millage increase or an increase on other fees and things like that. So we just want to make sure that in good conscience we can explain to residents, well, why do you have a 75% fund balance? The thing is that, our communication would be is that, we haven't, in essence, utilized that on some capital projects, and it is a very healthy fund balance. But I think we can definitely ratchet it down a little bit and get some capital projects and do some infrastructure to where the public can see their money is not just being set
Sitting in the
aside,
bank.
but it's actually
Okay.
working.
So that's where we're coming up with the 2,200,000.
Right,
Okay.
right.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
so to go forward, the next area we want to just give you some information on is how the FY 2017 budget to actual fared. And on page 25, the budget amounts for resources inflows or revenue, the original budget, then the final budget is calculated in the first two columns, and then the actual. And some of the areas where we did good and exceeded the budget is parking enforcement. And I know Chris will enjoy hearing this, but that actually exceeded the budget increase from 1.6 to 1.7 million for an increase of 76,000. Recreation did very good as far as exceeding the revenue, 420,000 plus over the budgeted revenue of 269,500. So there's an increase of 151,000. The FEMA revenue did not quite come in at what we had budgeted. We budgeted 1.3, and what we actually incurred as far as revenue is the 555,000. I mentioned the proceeds from sale of capital assets That's at 627,000. 625,000 of that is the new dock for the marina. And so basically, you go down then to the expenditures. Public Works fared pretty well, exceeding or coming under budget. So did Fire and Recreation. And so on page 26, you can see on that third column that the excess of revenues over expenditures was 483,000. The beginning fund balance for the general fund at the beginning of the year, 2017, was 10.2 and then grew to 10.6. So the auditor next Tuesday will probably be going more detail over this, I'm sure, and also have an opportunity to answer any questions you might have. But we just wanted to give you just a brief overview of the revenue and expenditures and how the last year fared. And again, due to that posting of that capital asset on the docks, kind of helped the total fund balance as a whole.
What does the auditor look at? What we tell him to look at? What does he look at?
As far as
As the numbers, I mean, does he go in and say, oh, we got a problem here in parking enforcement, I want to dig into it further? Does he do that, or does he just look at the general numbers, or what does he look at?
I think he compiles the general numbers. If he sees a problem, he's gonna go into it. There were some areas that he noted during his audit that he looked into a little bit further, and again, he can go into more of that. I will tell you though, I think his audits go, from what he conveyed to me, it was pretty much a clean audit. There were no major material or any significant material weaknesses or anything of that nature. I think the one issue that he might mention next Tuesday is that for the first time, he had to do a single audit, and that's because we exceeded the threshold of the dollar amount for grants. And a lot of we did grants, which includes the money that we get for Swift Mud and grant reimbursement, undergrounding project, and a lot of those little grants that we have. And for the first time, we had to do a single audit. And I think that his frustration is that there was, there needs to be a little bit more maintenance and control over the grants that we have, and we're trying to address that problem. I don't see it as a problem, and I don't think he saw it as a problem, but I think he indicated that as far as managing the grants, it can be a little bit better.
But he doesn't take and look at the rec department or the marina or the city hall here. And
I don't think he's going to drill down to what you're saying he's not going to drill down to a level unless he's probably asked, or again, unless he sees something.
He uses our reports. He
Yes.
uses all of our figures, or the figures that have been developed by the finance department.
Right.
And unless he sees a problem, he doesn't investigate that
He has
issue.
various tests that he goes through, and unless he sees something, he's not going to delve into that area. And again, I think he can explain the process and procedures that he goes through, in conducting his audit.
but if we wanted him to dig deeper, then we would just need to ask him.
Yeah, in fact, I have asked him on particular areas as far as areas where we do collect cash. Can he delve deeper into those particular areas? And that would be in addition to his scope. Right now, his scope is limited to the services that he does to do the audit. If we wanted him to delve deeper into any particular areas, particularly those areas that take in a lot of cash, then he could do that.
I'm just kind of thinking, when you say this and you're looking at these numbers, I know when we went through setting the budget last year, and it was brought up a couple times, I'm not trying to pick on any particular department or anything, but one of the things was we were spending X amount of dollars on fuel for sale to the public, and we were spending like 75, and we were only getting 50 back. It's like, you know, these type of things, to me, sitting up here is a big red flag. You know, why isn't that auditor saying, whoa, time out? You spent 75 and you're selling it for 50? So what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this picture? You know, so that's kind of what I'm asking. If he sees something like that, does...
Again, I think that he can mention this next Tuesday. There is certain areas that he brought to my attention that we should be a little bit more current in our, and we want to get better at this too. Sometimes you get complacent day to day and things that you're doing, but he wants us to get better in monitoring the cash locations, make sure that you know, inspect those a little bit more often than we have, and I'm committed to do that.
Madam,
And Walt, how long have we used the current auditors? How many years, do you know? 3, 4?
I think he's on his third or fourth year of the RFP that originally went out.
Okay, so some of those practices that he's suggesting or recommending that we're more careful on, had they changed in that period of time, or he was just suggesting and recommending it to you to?
You know, I don't think, sometimes he won't write anything, but he'll say, hey, Walt, I just think you need to look, you know, inspect some of these areas a little bit more. Him and I have had conversations to that nature. I don't know what his conversations have been to the previous.
Others before you? Okay.
No, but, you know, I value that as an auditor who can tell me and advise me, you know, to pay more attention to certain areas, and, you know, and I value that advice.
Well, we should, because that's his expertise. Isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may, one of the things that the auditor is, they're going to look at areas, of course, obviously, where you collect cash. They're also going to reconcile, again, some of the policies that you have in place, some of your resolutions, some of your fiscal management policies to make sure you're compliant. There is situations whereby if they say, well, we have some concerns on cash handling, that they will note it and they will come back, and when they audit it in a subsequent year, they will see if you've made the appropriate corrections. So if there is some specific areas where there's some deficiencies that he says, Walt, I think your team needs to look at it, those are areas that you can rest assured in subsequent audits that he's going to look at and then end up noting it in the audit as a finding or what have you. All the audits that are done across the state of Florida look at multiple different things. The auditor will look at areas where they believe that there's an opportunity for fraud or mismanagement or not following procurement policies and procedures, even down to the point where they grab your grant files and they shake your grant files because nothing is supposed to fall out. And so the auditor went through the FEMA homes, went through a lot of the different file folders that we do have. So they audit a bunch of different things. One of the things we've identified from the staff's point of view is that there needs to be more time or additional personnel to address the staff accounting aspects. There's opportunities that I think that we can be able to provide more real-time information on financial data, better cash management practices and procedures, but that's going to be something that we'll talk to you as part of the budget process. But we do have some areas of improvement, and if there's a situation whereby the board says, you know, I really would like to look into this in greater detail, my recommendation would be for us to engage another CPA firm to come in there and do that, not have your auditor that looks at your books all the time that's going to give you a clear audit to look at it. You definitely want somebody else that has no understanding of what you've got going on and is going to come in there and really look at everything. So that would be my recommendation should the board decide that you want a greater in-depth look at one of our operations moving forward.
So basically what you're saying, Mr. Evans, is if we see, or we feel that we need to do a forensic audit on Department A or Department C, or whatever department, then we should be bringing that to you, and then we hire an outside CPA firm or something like that?
Correct. Certainly, one of the things I would just have, you would start off with just a general audit, and then that auditor would say, well, this is going to need to be elevated, because a forensic audit will cost you about $100,000 to get into greater detail, because they go through everything. But a good auditing firm that has experience can go into that department and provide you pretty close to what you're looking for. And if they have some concerns, then they can come up and say, okay, I think there may be there's some concerns for X, Y, and Z, and this needs to be elevated, and they can communicate that. But that's something, if the board so chooses to say you're interested in having staff explore that, that's something that we'll put out a request for qualifications. We can have auditors come in. And my recommendation is, if the board wanted to do that, that you have that auditor report the findings directly to the board, that they don't end up going through administration. They of course work with the finance director to get the data and information, but the information is provided straight to the board, so there's no, perception of administration working to clean up the data or what have you, that it is something that the board initiates, and then that data is provided to the board.
Do you have an estimate what that would cost?
We can find that out. It's not even going to be a fraction of that cost. It shouldn't be something that it would be too expensive for us. It should be an inexpensive endeavor. But we can have that number for you at when we talk about financial management on the 22nd for sure.
And I might be getting off the subject again, but one time a few months ago, you had said that we're going to get to the point that if you have a city credit card and you go to store ABC and you swipe it, it'll show up so the residents out there can see where the money is being spent at any one time. And that's very big for transparency, which we have not had here for quite a while. When do we anticipate getting to that point? Is that once we get the new website set up and all that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yep. And then we would add the transparency portal. Yes, sir. And it will provide information. It can provide every check the city issues. It can provide down to even payroll checks. It'll have every nuance or every little bell and whistle that we're looking for can be there and at the residents' disposal to be able to see for themselves.
And actually, we were waiting to get good audited financial statements, which we now have, to dump that data into that transparency portal that will be added to the website. So we're hoping to go forward with that in the next couple of months, in addition to the website development.
You just threw a caution flag up to me, Mr. Evans, when you said, down to payroll. To me, that's something that shouldn't be. It should be like here's how much we spent on payroll. I don't want to see somebody that wrote a check for Mr. Jones and here's how much he's making. I don't think that type of information should be out there.
Right, we can make it as little or as much as, and that's something certainly we would talk to the board, kind of what are some of the things that your constituents would like to see. Certainly, when we cut checks to vendors, who our vendors are, those types of things, where we're spending money, credit card transactions, those types of aspects. But what we'll do is we'll bring examples of how other cities have deployed it, and then from that the board can say, I like this, I don't like this, and those types of things.
Thank you.
But
I
aren't
didn't mean to get off subject. I apologize.
That's okay.
Aren't salaries already public?
Yeah.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are, but I just think, if I put up there that, that Chris got a check for X amount of dollars, is this encouraging people to scam him? It scares me.
Well, but you can look at, there's places you can go, you can see how much Chris makes.
That's just
Not to pick on you, Chris, but,
You're standing
Not
there.
enough, right, Chris? Not enough.
well, maybe we are picking on you. Well,
I
anyway,
apologize.
we can talk about that later.
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll bring back a cost for and if an auditing firm, if the board wanted to engage an auditing firm to look specifically into a department on various different issues, we'll just make some ballpark calls and get a number for the board.
Thank you.
Going forward, we then wanted to get General Fund 2018 snapshot of where we're at. And actually, we used data through February, 5 months. And actually, what we did is, we used the 5 months to project to the rest of the year and what that would be. We kept revenues, so on page 28, we kept revenues pretty constant, hoping that we would receive all those. And then based on the level of expenditures and through 5 months or through February, how the departments would fare. And of course, the negatives in the variance column are actually good. The positives are ones you have to be concerned about. The city manager's office and the fire did very well, partly because of Darrell doing 2 functions during a period of time as city manager and fire chief. Community development, they're using consultants, and that bumped that up, but they're having to do that because of some of the new developments coming online. The non-departmental is high variance because of some of the hurricane debris that occurred in there. We're in the process of adjusting the clerk's projection. We actually almost see that as a break even, and because of this analysis was kind of done right before the recall, and with that not going forward, then we see the clerk's budget more or less as a break even period, or a break even point. So the bottom line is, we do think at this point in time that there's an 80, on the bottom of page 28, we're projecting an 81,000. Actually, giving the clerk 30,000 back, that figure is probably more about 111,000 rather than 81. So we do feel like we're in pretty good shape right now financially and doing this projection. And we feel like that we're homing in on some departments that are feeling some pain and focusing in on those and being aware of them. On page 29, the city manager actually asked to break down what are our personnel, operational, and capital costs, or budget and costs through February for each department. And I thought this analysis didn't really do this last year, but I thought this was beneficial because it does give you the percent used for each one of those 3 major categories, the personnel, operating, and capital by department. And we're going to try to do this report on a pretty regular basis. And the percentages here are pretty normal at this point in time. And thus far, there's almost close to the end of May, 3/4 of the fiscal year completed. And after May, with 1 quarter remaining, departments should be at or below the 75% expenditure level. So this is a report that we're going to find beneficial as we proceed in the next couple of months to see if departments are on target, and specifically if they're hurting in a particular area, whether it's personnel, operating, or capital.
And Madam Mayor, if I may, one of the things that we want to make sure is to provide the board with real-time updates every quarter with respect to where we are on the budget management side, and that's good information for us to place on the website. So if we see an anomaly whereby a department is expending, they're at 30 or 40% when they should be at 25%, we can start taking corrective actions to say, okay, well, in this department, we're going to go through a hiring freeze, or we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So what staff is going to be doing is providing you more information real time so you can see where we are at financially. And so this is just the first step in that we'll put out every quarter and provide, okay, this is the target, this is where departments are, those types of things. Also, this puts a a bookmark for the finance director and I to watch what departments spend coming into this last quarter, because once they find out that they're 30 or 40% and they should be in essence at 75%, we've got to control the mass spending. And so this gives us an opportunity to say, okay, well, we anticipate that each department turns back anywhere between 3 to 5% as part of the budget process, but also to make sure that departments say, well, we've got, X amount of dollars available. Just because you have it doesn't mean you need to spend it. And so this gives us an opportunity to monitor and watch that real time until we end the fiscal year.
Yeah, and one thing that I found very frustrating in September is all the way through the end, departments were spending heavily toward the end of September. And by the time I realized it was too late, because a lot of it was used by the credit card. I don't know if they felt like, well, we've still got some money in this account, we're gonna go ahead and spend it. And I don't like that rationale. So this year, we're gonna cut them off pretty early in September. You wanna do that anyway, because, I don't wanna wait till mid-October to figure out, what's been purchased on the credit card toward the tail end of September. So we need to put better controls on year-end processing and controlling some of the year-end spending.
And one of the things to that point is that in the event that Jonathan buys a widget, and if I buy the widget on September 10th, but I get that widget on October 1, the October 1 budget is charged for it. So I have to have the item that I am acquiring before September 30th. And invariably, when you allow for departments to continue that purchasing through September, you find a situation where you eat into your fiscal year budget starting right off the bat, because you've allowed for that mass purchasing push from departments. So we're probably going to be cutting a lot of our departments off from purchases that are not definite needs, probably towards August, to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation whereby somebody takes delivery of an item that's $3,000 or $4,000 and then it impacts the fiscal year 2019 budget.
And,
Well, can I ask you a quick question? Back on page 28,
okay,
down under you have the culture and recreation, the parks and recreation, they're all under budget by that point, by that dollar amount? Such as parks is 20,000 under?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that minus means minus means good. In fact, I will tell you, the recreation department, as far as the revenue, and I actually noted this in my NDNA and the CAFR, the recreation department did very well as far as exceeding revenue and coming under expenditures. So I was pleased to see that. And I got to credit a lot of that toward, I think when Darrell came in as acting, I think the pressure from the commission to watch the rec center, watch the spending there. And I've complimented Darrell before on keeping a handle and watching that. So I think that did pay off.
Right. Thank you.
The city manager also indicated he wanted me to research the third exemption proposal, or the proposed third homestead exemption that would be effective on the 2019 tax roll, November 1st, 2019 tax bill. And I had a contact at the property appraiser's office, and a figure that came back would be an estimate of $54,189. And as we delve deeper into that, we indicated on page 33, we asked the number of properties that would actually be impacted by this, and it would be 1,027 properties. And one thing that the property appraiser gave me on page 32 that I thought was very helpful, and it kind of broke in on that circle, it kind of really gave you a picture of how the exemptions kick in. And, but basically, the only ones that would apply to the third homestead exemption would be those properties with assessed value, and this is the middle, or the third sentence on page 32, would be the only assessed value between 100,000 and 125,000. And on page 33, we try to compare a home that meets that criteria of the 125, which is number 2, and a regular home assessed at 200,000, and what that would appear to be, just to give you a ballpark estimate of what that would look like. And again, the number of properties impacted is 1,027, and the city manager wanted also to know, well, if based on the 2017 roll, what would if we were at the same level as last year, what would we have to increase the millage by to counteract that impact of 54,000? And with the millage for the 2017 roll, if it held constant, we would have to increase it by 2.2500 to make up that 54,000.
Madam Mayor.
Not by, but two.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Increase it two, not
Right.
by.
I'm sorry, 2. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that we wanted to make abundantly clear in this slide is that when we talk about home rule authority and, things that ends up happening in Tallahassee, the profound impact that it has on local governments, if you can see the percentages out of an entire tax bill, the city of Madeira Beach receives, 12.6% when you look at these two particular parcels. And then more importantly and more concerning is that $24 million worth of taxable assets are going to be taken off the tax roll. And it's going to impact us that $54,000 a year, but that's compounding in perpetuity. So once that is lost, that is lost. And for us, we know that the additional homestead exemption is something that's definitely a benefit to our residents and to folks all across the state. But ultimately, local governments still have to provide some of the services that we have to provide. And we're fortunate that hopefully with some projected growth and some things happening that we'll be able to recoup that. But nonetheless, when you look at the taxing authorities and everyone's slice of the pie, we're relatively small speaking, and you pay for that person that has a house valued at $125,000 or even $200,000. You pay an entire tax bill of $330 to the city of Madeira Beach. That's cheaper than most American cell phone bills. The average cell phone bill in the U.S., I think, is $76 per month. And I think we provide a lot better service than some of your cell phone providers. But nonetheless, this is something that we just wanted to show that we anticipate this ballot passing, and this ballot initiative passing overwhelmingly, and the impact to the city will be $54,000. And we will definitely put out information to inform voters so that they can make an informed decision at the polls. But nonetheless, we're preparing for that. And that is anticipated that it will be on the November ballot, and it will take effect in 2019. So I think the fiscal impact is projected to happen in fiscal year 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So they give organizations and government a little bit of time to be able to prepare for that. But I've seen in other local governments that it's $500,000. And the other thing is that we can anticipate with some of the initiatives that were just passed this legislative session, taxes holistically throughout the county will end up going up, whether it's the school board, whether it's the county, because of the legislation concerning the need for law enforcement officers at schools. There is going to be a tax increase, and invariably local governments us closest to the constituents will probably end up getting some comments from the public. But we are going to really communicate to folks that when you look at your entire tax bill, it's not the entire $800 or $2,000 or $5,000 that you pay that comes to Madeira Beach. It goes to all those other taxing authorities.
You know, with the school tax, you're showing in here at what, 40%? You know, that's with it being mandatory that they put officers in schools, you know, and they push the burden down to the school districts to figure out how to fund it.
Yep.
That number's gonna skyrocket.
Yep, and they're exempt from that third exemption too.
Yep.
So,
And they're gonna, you know, the residents are gonna go ballistic on us. You know, they're gonna blame, you know, so I think, like you were just saying, we need to put out a really good campaign explaining what is going on. Because I know, just when we had the recall, one of the things that came out is that we raised taxes last year, which we didn't. But, you know, they're gonna hit every one of us that, you know, we didn't control the tax. You know, we let it go up, but that's, you know, we really need to be showing the people what is going on. You know, an ad campaign, send something, mail something out to everybody. I don't know how we're gonna go about it, but I think it's very important that the residents understand what's going on with the taxes, because it is gonna go crazy. I believe, because the school boards, I think, are gonna hit us pretty daggone heavy.
Well,
And changing that from 50 to 75,000 for homestead exemption is gonna be a big budget.
that'll be another thing, right? But the point about the officers being in the schools, it wasn't the last one, but I think it was 2 meetings ago at the Big C meeting, Guadalupe, is that how you pronounce this? Yeah, Guadalupe, the sheriff.
yes. Gutierrez.
They were they were making some comments about that event coming up and being the end of July. And they were also talking about, and I don't know if anybody's followed up on this, but they were talking about tapping into or getting, the sheriff was talking into, okay, the county checking into another fund. Do you remember that? Could be maybe utilized.
They were looking at funding it from their general reserve fund, so they're unassigned, but
You remember that?
eventually they're
That'll
going
run
to.
out.
Yeah, they absolutely said that wasn't going to happen, and really putting the pressure on the school district to effectively fund those officer positions. And that's going to be, you know, the local jurisdictions that do have schools in their community is something that that have been requested to pay for the additional officers, and they have provided information with an emphatic no that they're not willing to comply with what is being requested as part of that piece of legislation. We did receive information from for our extension on our law enforcement services, and so we haven't seen any increases associated with that, since we do have Madeira Beach Fundamental here. But nonetheless, the cost for law enforcement services throughout the county is going to go up, and somebody's going to have to, in essence, pay that bill. So we're going to continue to watch that and monitor that. But the county, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, has put the onus and the responsibility back on the school board, and the statute really provides that the school districts are the responsible entity to effectively provide that service.
So we'll see that go up.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point though, John, I think that when that happens, the public's going to be aware of it. They're already aware of it. It's been in the papers and it'll be in the news media.
I know, but there's still.
There'll be a
yeah, we're
Right.
the ones that are they're gonna take the hit on it. We
Well,
are.
I would if it was me. I mean, you know, I'd be
Yeah.
calling my commissioner and
But
saying,
I'm just saying,
what
we
is
need to
this?
do a good advertising campaign to really explain to the people. And Mr. Evans talked about hiring a PR person. You know, that should be one of their primary things, is to get this out to the people. You know, hey, you know, your taxes might have went up by X amount of dollars, but, you know, really look at where it's going up at. You know, like the school boards is what, 7%? You know, that might jump to 9%. You know, that's going to take a big.
They're at 40%.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I mean, the
Yeah.
rate is
Oh, yeah.
7%, you know, and that might go to 9%. To fund all these police officers they must have by law now in the school. So things that I think we need to look at is getting that word out to people so they really, really understand it, you know. They hear about, hey, yeah, you gotta have a police officer in every school, but they don't think, hey, I don't have any kids, I'm
So I don't have to pay
retired,
for
I'm a
it.
grandfather, I don't have kids in school, you know, so why am I paying that? So I'm
But
just
don't you
saying
think
that-
they really will find some of it within their own resources? Or do you think the whole thing will be passed on and we will be flummoxed with this and have to do this for this next budget year?
I think there's going to be a temporary solution that's found between the county and the school district and local jurisdictions, but inevitably it will lead to what the commissioner has communicated, a tax increase, whether it's on the county side or on the school district side, because the cost for law enforcement services just for us is about $98,000 per officer. And so when you look at adding additional officers in these schools that have to go up to 3 or 4 different officers, it's a sizable impact.
The last part, Clara and I are putting together a more extensive budget calendar, but on page 35, we did want to give you just the key budget dates, just so that from a time aspect that we're aware of it. June 1st, the property appraiser delivers the estimate of taxable value to the taxing authorities. July 3rd, the proposed budget, including 2-year CIP, submitted to the Board of County City Commissioners. August 3rd is the deadline to notify the property appraiser of the proposed millage rate and first public hearing. September 4th is the first reading and public hearing of the millage and budget. And September 13th is the advertisement of the FY 2019 budget summary, the trim ad, and the budget hearing ad. September 18th is the second public hearing to adopt the 2019 budget and millage rate. September 21st, send final millage rate to the property appraiser's office. And then October 17th, the finance director certifies the trim compliance to the Department of Revenue. And like I said, Claire and I are going to be comparing a more detailed budget calendar that includes the dates for the budget committee and the upcoming workshops. And the workshop that we're planning next week for the one-on-one with the commissioners is,
21st through the 23rd.
okay.
What the finance director has said, we're going to be sitting down with each of you individually to get your perspectives and thoughts on some components in the budget. So when we have that conversation as a group, that we incorporate your thoughts, philosophies, and ideologies in the actual document as well. So, and then that will also come back to you so you can see the perspective of your peers, but wanted to have an opportunity for you to say, you know what, Jonathan, I think we need to focus more on infrastructure, or we need to look at these components in personnel or operating, and just a one-on-one session to provide myself and the budget team a little bit of individual direction before we come back before you again and get in depth into some of the operational and capital and personnel aspects of it.
One of the things, when we get to that point, I know last year, when we were going through the budget, it was very confusing to me, and other people have brought it up to me, that, there was, if I wanted to figure out how many cell phones, or how much we were spending on cell phones in the city, I had to go to this department, then this department, then this department, and constantly go through there.
Yep.
Where we asked for a total.
Yep.
Here's how much we're spending on uniforms, here's how much we're spending.
We will have that this year.
Okay, just so it makes it a little bit clearer to us.
It's going to be unfortunately, some of our reports aren't geared to provide that information, but we're making some modifications to make sure that that's tracked better. I heard that loud and clear toward the end of the budget process. What was the total number of budget for the cell phones and some other things. So, yeah, I get it.
Thank you.
And certainly that's stuff that in those individual meetings, there's things that you've mentioned at previous budget workshops and things you want to make sure that is communicated to the public. That's a great opportunity to let us know so we can make sure we incorporate it in the discussion that we have with the board on future budget workshops.
You know, and I just want to be clear on the approach that we took for the departments. There was a city manager's desire to do truly zero-based budgeting. We took the department's operational budget that they had the previous year. We increased that by 2%, and we gave them that pot of money, and they were then responsible for allocating that to the various accounts that they have. So they received one lump sum, and then they were allocated to the various accounts. Then we also asked them to do another analysis that what if you had to cut that by 5%, what accounts would you cut? So they went through that exercise, and you know, I think it's been pretty beneficial. Instead of just saying count by account, well, this is 300 I had in cell phones last year, I'm going to have the same amount. That's not the approach that they took this time. And this time there was a little bit more thought to it.
Thank you both for all your hard work on this so far. I know
I appreciate it.
it's a pain in the butt. I know. Been there, done it, so thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, that concludes our kickoff budget workshop.
All right, well, is there any more discussion before we adjourn? Okay. We are now adjourned, 4:12.